Sidney Fowler Wright was a British writer and accountant who quit school at the age of 11, and 12 years later he had already acquired a flourishing accountancy practice, according to N. Fowler Wright, with, quote, no examinations, no qualifications, just a good head for figures. After a few years, Wright liquidated most of his business, keeping only a couple of clients, and proceeded to open up a bookshop in London at age 70. He and his wife co-founded the Poetry League, amongst whose members numbered H.E. Bates and A.G. Street, which was co-presided by J.K. Chesterton, who was a frequent acquaintance of the Wrights. Despite his shop being destroyed during the war, Wright soon built his office and supplied a secondary book-selling business on the same premise for his wife, the clientele of which consisted of people like Bernard Shaw or Peter Cheney. Closing the book-selling business in 1954, and not publishing much of anything for the remaining 10 years of his life after 1955, Wright died in 1965 at Midhurst, aged 91. According to Brian Stableford, Wright was one of the 20th century's central contributors to the scientific romance. His first novel, The Amphibians, a romance of 500,000 years hence, is a tale of the far future where humans are extinct and is noted to be both influenced by whales and also its structures resembling that of the Odyssey. Today we will examine two works by Wright, a short story collection and a latter novel, which both carry through a certain common theme in Wright's science fiction writing. We begin with The New God's Lead. In The New God's Lead we find a collection of tales warning of the desensitization of science and logic divorced from humanity. However, the collection, slowly progressing further and further ahead into the future with each story, begins on a smaller, more personal level. We have the tale of a murder epidemic where people, burdened by the legal enforced care for their relatives, begin to slaughter each other's dependable and useless relatives because of the sheer economic unbearability. We have the story of a preeminent professor threatening a woman with skin disease just so she would bear him a son simply to validate a theory of his. Then there's a story of a dead woman's testimony in court having disastrous consequences for her, but this story seems slightly more tragic, comedic, and kind of sticks out like a bit in this collection. However, most of the stories focus not on individual actions or the consequences of a singular invention on a singular case, but describe the result of terrible oppression from overly scientific, desensitized governments, which have slowly removed all sympathetic and emotional considerations from their inner workings, and proceed to grind people beneath the iron heel for the sake of progress and understanding. A society, for example, where those of inferior intellect are euthanized by the thousands. We have another story where a scientific government deposes a civilian one, where amid intrigues and plottings to overthrow each other, these learned men wish to graft the brains of newborn babies onto dogs and vice versa, where the president of the council proceeds to make a common pig reach intelligence that does her no good. We have an oppressive scientific society which both forces women and men to marry according to the government's selection, as well as making most women have to share a husband with several others, and where two unmatchable people must plot to escape to Brazil. Yet almost always, when dealing with these societies, Wright still has the grim ideologies eventually frustrated. There is the exception here and there, like the story of the slow replacement of humans by robots, but overall, Wright seems hopeful that, in the end, common sense will prevail over cool and heartless logic. 17 years later, after the publication of this book in 1932, Arkham House took this collection and reissued it under the title The Throne of Saturn, which I don't really know what it's reference to, because there's really nothing about the planet Saturn in both the original and reissued version of this collection, and subsequently added two stories. One where a woman is made too cold for the touch temporarily by the conniving aunt of a would-be suitor, and a reprint of an already previously published story called Original Sin, which was the original short story version of what would later become the novel The Adventure of Wyndham Smith, the other focus of today's video. The Adventure of Wyndham Smith is a novel taking place in a far-off future around the end of the third millennium or so. All possible hurt, injury, or disease has long been eliminated, and human life has regressed to a completely placid and exciting monotony. The birthing of children is subject to a schedule. There are no quarrels, and basically all the knowledge that human science could obtain has already been obtained. Now, the scientific government of the world decides to endorse a global vote on whether or not the entire human race should subject itself to mass suicide, and the entire human race unanimously agrees. But just before the final decision is made, the mind of Wyndham Smith, a man from our time, is switched with that of Kolpek for XP, one of the people from the future, to give them another perspective on the whole thing. However, Wyndham's mind, or egos, since the body retains in scientific knowledge, remains in the future, where he meets with Vanessa, a woman who is suspected to be a child born in excess of the regulated amount as a result of an illegal passion held by her mother, though the truth of this is hidden from the common public to shield her from scorn. Before, Kolpek did not like Vinetta, but Wyndham's mind takes a fancy to her, and they plot to secretly remain alive after everyone else in the world is dead. Though the government plans to forestall any attempt at frustrating their great work of mass suicide and human extermination, and even should they succeed, they must deal with the uncontrolled machines that will be able to kill them when everyone else is dead, being completely and utterly beyond a singular person's control. We find here the most clearly distilled and impressive version of Wright's theme of logical and scientific dehumanization on humanity, finding a human race that exists in such a vacuum of perfect content that all emotions have been slowly drilled out of it, where everyone in the world gleefully accepts the idea of global and complete self-destruction simply because it means there will be something for them to do. It is a remarkable book, and I highly advise you to read it. Original Sin described the same basic idea, but with very little opposition to the main character's goals, and its short nature meant the treatment of the subject was a rather surface level, so it is indeed fortunate that Wright saw the potential in the story, and instead of publishing it originally when he wrote it, he expanded it into a full-length novel. The original version of the story was actually published in 1945, 3 years before The Throne of Saturn, in the collection The Witchfinder. Wright wrote many other things, including science fiction and historical novels, so I expect to return to his work in the future.